Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. We think that part of the functions of a college is to open minds and broaden horizons in a number of areas. Religion, for example. With me today is Dr. Karen Boyd, who is teaching a class in comparative religion on campus. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Religion can be a controversial topic.
Somewhat.
Let's say that I'm thinking about taking your class, and I am a committed Christian. I believe in the Christian faith. I'm comfortable with my faith. And I say to you, well, I'm comfortable as a Christian. Why should I take a class about these other religions? What would you say?
I would say you're hitting my main course objective head on. Because what I want people to be able to do is, even within their own framework, you have within your own framework, within your own denomination, within your own congregation, you have, if you're Methodist like I am, you have every 4 years a change in pastors. And by George, 1 year, one pastor will say this, and the next pastor that comes along will say that. And the next one comes along and says something else entirely. Okay? That's just at home. When you expand that throughout your denomination, past your denomination into wider and wider areas, all you get is conflict. Who knows what to believe? So, my objective is to help students figure through a process they can be comfortable with to sort through conflicting information and find information they can trust and make their own judgments. And that's part of the educational process, is to make your own judgments, right? So that fits in with that.
Now, teaching, of course, is not your main occupation here. You're the Director of Institutional Research. Did I get that right?
Institutional research.
But you have
not a director.
Not a director, institutional research. And you have a master's degree.
Master's degree in theology.
In theology.
It took me a while to figure out what I was going to do with my life, yeah.
And that is from
Emory University,
in
Candler School of Theology.
In Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. Studied with Jim Fowler. Worked for him for 5 years.
I think the point you brought up is an excellent point, and that is, someone wise once said, there is no Christian position, just Christians who hold positions. And that would be true of Muslims and Jews and Hindus and everyone else. And I like the point you made about the differences of opinion in one congregation. In a typical Methodist church, I was reared Presbyterian, and I can speak for Presbyterians as well, you do see this great difference of theological and political and philosophical views. And I think that's a very important point to deal with. The structure of the class, you will study what, the major world religions?
We are studying the major, we've got a thick book, and I decided I was going to make a choice there between quantity and quality, and I decided to opt on the quality side.
I think that's a wise choice.
So I'm limiting it to, we're going through Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And then at the end, the last couple weeks, the students are going to be working on their research paper. And the research paper is supposed to be about, I've given them a list of suggestions, but they can come up with somebody else if they want. But it has to be somebody who has won either the Nobel Peace Prize or a couple other prizes I've listed. And it has to be somebody who's had at least one book written about them, or they've written an autobiography or whatever. And they're supposed to gather some research on that person, read their autobiography or biography, and then tell me, in 7 pages or less, I'm glad I'm not facing this challenge myself, because putting it all in a nutshell, that's a big challenge for students. But I want them to tell me what was that person's background. Oh, and I left out an important part. They have to choose somebody from a religious background different from their own. So if they're Christian, they're not supposed to choose somebody from the list of Christians. They have to go somewhere else. And they're supposed to tell me then, looking at what they have learned about that religion, what can they see in that religious background that would lead that person to become the wonderful person they became. So I'm hoping students will see that good people can come out just about anywhere.
Now, of course, this semester is already rolling, but if there's interest, you would like to do this again maybe next semester if possible?
Though, as long as they ask me, I'll be there, yeah. Assuming that I don't get tomatoes thrown at me or anything, and it looks like it's going to be going pretty well so far.
But so you haven't needed a flak jacket so far?
No, not yet.
That's
Not
it.
yet.
And you know, in all seriousness, some people find it very difficult to discuss religion because it's not discussing politics, it's theology. And I remember hearing a story told several years ago by a friend of mine, and she said her husband and this man were discussing theology, and this other man heard him and said, "Now, fellows, you need to quit doing that because you're gambling with your soul doing that." So you will encounter that, perhaps.
Well, you know, I'm fortunate in that my doctoral degree is actually educational psychology. And in the process of taking the coursework in that program, I took a bunch of courses also in counseling psychology, because that's related to education.
And
There's a
theology,
whole-
because it's pastoral counseling.
Exactly. So I'm using a lot of what I learned in those courses in this course as well. And in between discussions on theoretical issues, I'm also bringing students' attention to the idea that anytime they want to disagree with one another, that's fine, as long as we're sticking to the issues and trying to nail down what are the facts, what's true, what's false. But what we want to avoid is name-calling and dismissing points and misinterpreting people and that sort of thing. And actually, I started off when we were laying out the syllabus for the course and so forth. I had the students, that was our very first discussion session, was what should be the ground rules for discussion?
And what did you all come up with?
Well, pretty much what I had hoped. You know, I think basically people are in agreement. They don't like to be misinterpreted. They like to be heard. They don't like to be cut off in mid-sentence. One of the students brought that up, and I said, "You're absolutely right, and I agree with you, but don't ever live in New York City." I lived in the state of New York for 2 years, and I don't think I finished a sentence the whole time I was there. But the common, ordinary rules of conversation should apply at the college level, and probably if you want to kick it up a notch then and say this is a college-level conversation, you're going to try to stick to what's true, and if you don't know what's true, then start looking it up.
Well, who, any particular individuals you all are going to study? Great theologians, great thinkers, great minds?
No, this author, I think, has designed this text specifically for freshmen and sophomore undergraduates. Now, he mentions constructivism and deconstruction, and he mentions people with important names, and just he'll let students at least hear the name. But I'm not going to have students start memorizing this person said this and that person said that when there's one paragraph that's been given to them. But they should at least, if they're interested at all, that will give them food for thought, and if they're interested, then they can follow up on that. But that's not the point. The point is, in this textbook, and I like this for this level of course, to just enter. There's a lot of pictures in this book, so you get to some of the flavor of the architecture and the art and religious practices and rituals and the activities that are associated with these different religions, so that students get a kind of experiential feel for what the religion is like. And as an introduction, I think That's probably a good thing. If you start getting into the deconstruction and post-construction and all that, I think people's eyes will start glazing over and
Might
we'll
want to
get
say
lost.
that's a theology school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk later.
I will tell you this, and I don't know if this young man signed up for your course or not, but there was a young fellow who came into our office area and was looking. He was going to join the Marine Corps eventually, and thought he might wind up in Iraq. And he said, I want to take a course to learn something about the Muslim faith. And I thought, that's great. And I don't know if he signed up or not, but that was the sort of thing that's got to do your heart good to hear things like that. It certainly did us, that someone really, that was the idea. And I assumed that he was a Christian. I don't know, but I assumed that. That's a terrific, that's a wonderful thing.
Find out what's going on. Don't go in with a whole lot of stereotypes that you've overheard from this person and that person and your Uncle Joe and assume that that's true, because there can be. Well, in fact, I brought with me a little thing. This is the kind of thing I want students to be able to encounter in there after they leave West Kentucky entirely. They're going to encounter things like this. This is a fellow who has a big website. And every day he comes off with this little editorial column. And so this is something we're going to be discussing in class next week. In this column, he explains what the 3 isms that are dominating our culture today, and tells you what's so about those isms and how a good Christian would believe. First is relativism. Second is pluralism. And that starts with P, and that rhymes with T, and that stands for trouble. And the third one is universalism, which he says is the idea that everyone is going to heaven no matter what they believe. That's universalism. So
that's certainly red meat.
This will be good.
That would, in fact, I think what we should have done is taken the camera into your class and filmed that discussion, because that should be good. But again, going back, I think that's what a college is for, is to examine controversial issues and disagree without being disagreeable.
And we've got a nice library right here. Good interlibrary loan services. I've used them a million times myself.
I have
They're
too.
wonderful.
They are.
And we can find out what's so about these things.
Well, I think that will be you'll have to get back and tell me about the discussion. That should be that should be a good one. When you go through, when you're talking about the different religions, are you going to approach this more from a theological perspective or a historical perspective? Because I teach in my European history classes, I teach what I call the historical Jesus, and I tell students this is not a theology class. We're going to look at the historical ideas. So, which approach are you going to take, or both, or?
What I am doing is, I suppose it would be more of a. If you categorized it, it'd be a constructivist approach, because what I'm doing is I've given the students, I've told them that I want them to identify, I've got about 8 characteristics of religions.
Go through those. I've been interested in hearing
that. They're supposed to create a table for each chapter. One chapter is devoted to one religion. And then as we go along through the course, they're going to be able to compare, okay, this religion says this about, okay, what's the attitude toward death? What do they believe about death? Is there a life after death? There's a, what's going on with that? And then once they've accumulated their table for each one of the religions, then we're going to be able to discuss, okay, when you're making a decision for yourself, what you believe, what are you basing that on? What are you looking at? What's appeals to you and what doesn't? So let's see, we're looking at death. Gosh, it's kind of dismal that occurred to me first. Well, that's the most common thing.
I think it is, and I think one of the functions of religion, any religion, is to deal with the great unknown,
right.
Because if you say you're not afraid of dying, you're either lying or not telling the truth. I mean, that is something that absolutely is fundamental.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, the greatest mystery of all is what happens
Yeah.
when you die.
Yeah.
So,
And when you think about the Christian religion, there are so many things that, if not directly, they're indirectly related to that. The whole idea of salvation is concerned with, so what's going to happen to me after I die? It's not really a concern with, so what consequences am I going to suffer here and now if I shoot this guy and eliminate my enemy? It's what's going to happen to me after I die.
Right.
So another thing is attitudes toward men and women. Are they different? Are they this? Are they ordained? Another thing is,
And that's a very controversial topic. Now, going back to your master's degree, was that an ordainable degree?
there were 2 tracks. One was for ordination, and that took 3 years, and one was the Master of Theological Studies, which was a 2-year program. It was designed for people who were like me at the time. I was thinking about getting my PhD in theology. It was the program I was interested in was the intersection of theology and psychology. So I eventually got into educational psychology.
I guess what I was driving at is the ordination of women is very controversial in many religions. Now, Methodists, not controversial.
No.
Well, to a certain extent, but I mean, there have been women pastors of the Methodist Church for years. Presbyterian Church, the denomination of my youth, same thing. But in some denominations,
it's not going to happen.
oh no,
Yeah.
and that's a very, very controversial subject.
Yeah.
Is that going to come? That'll come up in your class then?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that'll be well.
Yeah.
That'll be another interesting discussion to see that. So, but anyway, go ahead with the 8. We talked about death, and that's important, and role of women. That's another one.
Women. Wish I'd reviewed that before I come
Well,
there.
don't worry. Just summarize it.
What's the relation between humanity and the universe?
Ooh, very good.
I won't give away any of the absolute correct answers, but there's some religious frameworks say the universe is what it is, and there's no relationship between, whereas Christian religion, Judaism also, I believe, there's a kind of notion that there's not exactly a personification of nature in the universe, but there's some notion that somehow they intersect, and if we are good stewards of our world, we can live harmoniously with it.
And that brings an interesting point in the book of Genesis, the passage where it says God gives man dominion over the earth. Well, see, now, and I go in my class, I'll talk about that. I said now, and in some of the very early translations, the word is stewardship.
Right.
And there's a big difference.
Right. That's another thing we talked about in the very first class. Let's be careful about our definition of terms. So when we're using a word that's an important word, let's think about exactly how people mean that.
And the word dominion, the meaning has changed through the years.
So now it sounds like you're a dictator.
Exactly,
you're a
dominator.
Dominator.
Right, and a steward is a caretaker.
Right.
And that's the thing. That brings up another funny story. In fact, I told you when we were talking earlier about this, about the Bible and its many and various translations. In the 1920s, I believe it was, a governor of Texas was railing against the teaching of foreign languages in the public schools of Texas, and he said, holding a King James Bible, he said, if English is good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for me. And we laugh at that. But I'm afraid, especially the red letter edition of the Bible, that is an exact translation of what Jesus said. Do you deal with that? You will deal with that issue because, there are some people who believe that the Bible is absolutely inerrant. It is the absolute revealed Word of God like this. And if you question that, you're questioning God, and we know what happens if you do that. So you'll get to deal with that too.
Well, one of the things that I'm hoping to cover in one of these early classes is, and I don't want to get too theoretical on you here, but there is this is a very straightforward problem if you stop and think about it. There are two kinds of problems in this world. There are well-structured problems and there are ill-structured problems. The well-structured problems are like, what's 2 plus 2? It's 4. And as long as you're not talking about some kind of physics or gets outside the realm of ordinary conversation, 2 plus 2 is 4. Absolute answer. But it's very rare that we deal in everyday life with a well-structured problem.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our problems are ill-structured. Even, what's the best car to buy? Okay, the best car for you to buy, that's going to be one thing. For me, going to be something else. I have different needs. If you have 12 kids, you need a minibus.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I am routinely just driving myself around, just a little car with great gas mileage, that's the right one for me. Okay? So without getting into questions of the relativism directly, recognize at least when is a problem a well-structured problem or an ill-structured problem. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you can get that kind of clarified, then you can start moving into what things about the situation are ill-structured. And let's start looking at problems with their many facets. You can still solve it, you can still find the best answer, but you can't be hitting people over the head and saying, this is the best answer for me and everybody in the whole wide world. Not going to happen.
That's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
No, I think this class, in fact, it was funny, I was thinking the other day, one of the classes that I regret not taking as an undergraduate, I can never fit it in my schedule, was comparative religion. Because if you're reared in one particular faith, by the very nature, you're not necessarily going to know a whole lot about other faiths.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, and then if you hear many people like this guy, you'd almost be afraid to even listen to any alien ideas. You'd be contaminated or something. I don't know what happens to you if you even listen.
Mm-hmm.
So, but God gave us brains, and He must have done that for a reason. So we need to use them.
You're not going to believe this, but I say the very same thing in my class. And we didn't get this up. I always say this, that to me, one could argue that one way to worship God, if you're a believer in God, is to use this brain. Because either God gave it to you, or through evolution, whatever. We are the only species that I know of that can think and reason. And I think that's a fascinating approach. And as I said, challenging, and that's the fun of college, is to be exposed to ideas that you may believe in or may not believe in. And I think this class is, I certainly hope there's enough interest in it to carry on with it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that has struck me, and I've heard this, and I'm not a theologian, is that almost all major religions have a version of the golden rule in it.
Yes.
And
even Buddhism,
yeah,
which is almost the unreligion in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of that.
Mm-hmm.
So what else? Tell us. We've got 4 minutes left, and I want you to do the talking, not me. What else?
Well, I could follow that up with what's common among all of the major religions, and there aren't many things that are truly shared by all of the major, but one of them is something like the Golden Rule. The other one, I would say, is the principle of universalization. Now, this guy is...
he'd be praying for you now.
He'd be praying for me now, but that's a whole different definition of the term. Universalization is just saying you should not do anything that you would not find acceptable for somebody else to do.
That's sort of a version of the Golden Rule, a little bit.
It really is. really is. It's just a monitor of behavior generally as opposed to how you treat other people individually. But those two things, you find them just about everywhere. So you got to say, all right, then why is there so much, when the core principles are the same, why is there so much conflict? And I could spout off for another half hour on that one.
Well, you've got 3 minutes.
I would say follow the money. People use religion as a pretext for grinding money axes. And as far as I'm concerned, when you dig down behind what's going on in the conflicts that appear on the surface to be religious conflicts, no. They're conflicts over money and power and...
Very quickly, a dear English friend of ours who's retired from the British Army used to be a beefeater in the Tower of London, carried people all around the tower in the red suit. And Cedric says, the trouble with British history is we've had too many Catholics, too many Protestants, and not enough Christians. I think that's pretty well put for a old sergeant major of artillery, and that's fascinating. And I think there's a big difference, and I think students are aware. There's big difference between preached religion and practiced religion, and maybe that's where the trouble lies. And again, I when I heard about this, and we've taught this course before, and I think it's a great course, and I certainly hope, if I can get editorial, that you do get more people to do this. It's a fascinating topic to me. It's a very interesting topic to me. I really enjoy discussing theology. It's a lot of fun, and I can imagine going back and getting a master's in it someday. It's an interesting topic. It really is. So, if someone wanted to just call you up and talk about this, and is there a telephone number at school they could reach you?
Sure is. I don't have it. 53404, but what's the first?
53404
is my extension. So what's
our prefixes are 534.
3404.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Got that? And better yet, look at our website. It's on there. So, you're meeting on Tuesday night?
Tuesday nights.
Tuesday night. Can't do it on Wednesday night. That's church night.
That's what I hear.
It is in Western Kentucky for some denominations. And what do we got? 30 seconds left. Give me some final thoughts. Anything very quickly, last minute?
Interpretation of Scripture. I'll give you a little chuckle. Okay, interpretation of Scripture. Husband and wife arguing. Who makes the coffee in the morning? Husband says, it's the woman's job to do that. The Bible says so. The wife says, you get up first in the morning, and I think the Bible says the man should do it. Look right here. Opens the Hebrews.
That's probably a good place to end it on. I think we'll stop there. My guest today was Dr. Karen Boyd, who will be teaching comparative religion this semester and hopefully next semester too. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.